also the host of the Sago Show. And I'm going to pass it to my co-MC.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Rachel, for starting us off. My name is Joy. I'm your second MC today. I'm part of the National Executive Committee of Malaya Movement. I'm also the chapter coordinator of the Los Angeles chapter. And then I'm also an assistant professor with expertise in Filipino American history and activism. So building off of what Rachel said, covering the fascism in the Philippines, we can also see very much so blatant fascism here in the United States. And we see that it's purposefully cruel and inhumane, and Filipino migrants have been swept up in these ICE raids and kidnappings and detentions. And there is no helpful response from the Philippine government. At the beginning of the Trump administration, when Trump announced his anti-immigrant campaign, Philippine ambassador to the United States, Jose Manuel Romualdez, told undocumented Filipinos to self-deport. Boo! Please put some boos in the chat. And when there are Filipinos in detention, the Philippine government isn't around to help them. It is grassroots organizations that are tending to and finding Filipinos in ICE detention and freeing them. And we see that more people want to get involved and take action, and that is why Malaya Movement, an organization dedicated to human rights, democracy, and sovereignty, is extremely important right now.
That's right. And so this is going to be Marcos Jr.'s third SONA. But we know that year after year, there is always a response from the people, right? And so, as we've said, Malaya Movement USA being founded as an organization of Filipinos against fascism, we really have an important role in exposing fascism in the Philippines, here in the US, and demanding accountability. And so we can go to the next slide.
And so I'll take us through the agenda for today. So we are going through the welcome. And thank you. And then we'll have a brief overview of what is fascism, an overall situation in the Philippines, the United States, and the world. And then the Florida and Los Angeles chapter speakers will give a presentation on their local situations. Then we'll have our special guests give presentations on Duterte's ICC trial and Sarah's impeachment and the human rights situation in the Philippines. And after that, we'll have Q&A and then closing and calls to action. So we will, before going into the whole agenda, we do want to give the features of fascism and give a baseline definition of it so that we all have a foundational understanding of what is fascism. So I will turn it over to the next facilitators.
Thank you, Joy. In order to understand the current state of fascism, both here in the United States and in the Philippines, we must understand the features of fascism, which we'll be going over. It begins with a group of elite, big capital owning class wielding state power. Fascism initially began as a response to growing collective action by the working class. Fascism became a tool that they used to silence and oppress these movements. Today, however, more dire economic conditions create the right environment to radicalize the masses, which the capital owning class has taken advantage of to wield and seize power. Tattoo will talk more, my friend Tattoo will talk more about the consolidation of economic and political power.
Thank you, Chris. So one of the features of fascism is an extremely centralized political and economic authority. And we saw this with the Marcos dictatorship and the Marcos family when martial law was imposed on September 21st, 1972. Marcos appointed 8 of 11 justices of the Philippine Supreme Court, right? And he also assured loyalty of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, or the AFP, by forcibly retiring 14 of the AFP's 25 flag officers, AFP chiefs of staff, the AFP vice chiefs of staff, as well as the commanding general of the Philippine Army, and appointed officers from Ilocos to ensure basically that he has his power on hold. And so he also consolidated the economy by helping with crony capitalism and helping his cronies by using presidential decrees and letters of instruction to basically put people that he was close to in positions of authority and power, right? Enabled Juan Ponce Enrile to control the logging industry, which also devastated the environment and led to the forest cover of the Philippines being shrunk to 8%. Danding Cojuangco to control the coconut industry, Roberto Benedicto to control the sugar industry, as well as Antonio Florendo to control the banana farming industry, right? And so we also see that in the USA with Donald Trump trying to consolidate political and economic authority by very hampering the independent agencies that are under his control, firing several independent agency leaders, inspector generals, which include the National Labor Relations Board, as well as the Federal Trade Commission. You see also appointing cronies by appointing at least 13 billionaires in his administration and cabinet with a total net worth of $450 billion, which is a lot. That's extremely significant. And even contracts, using government contracts to people he's close with as well. For example, Elon Musk received over 30 billion in federal government contracts, right? Through Starlink, through Tesla, through SpaceX as well, and shutting down any investigations into any of these companies. And we also see how they're using unrestricted use of armed or coercive force in the next slide, in the next feature, where fascism also tends to use unrestricted use of armed or coercive force and disposing of the formal democratic processes to impose its aims. Right under Marcos, Congress was abolished and political parties were outlawed essentially, and suspended writ of habeas corpus, which is used to challenge unlawful detention. And because of that, 3,257 known extrajudicial killings, and that's just known extrajudicial killings, right? Over 35,000 documented cases of torture, over 70,000 incarcerated, and 737 forced disappearances as well. And there's also civil militias as well, like barangay self-defense units, later renamed civilian home defense forces. And we see those militias out here in the US as well under Trump, or at least weaponizing armed forces by using ICE, Border Patrol, National Guard, even Marines to basically suppress protest and people speaking out, as well as raiding immigrants, which other facilitators will speak more to as well. And you see Trump ignoring court orders to not deport immigrants and utilizing the Alien Enemies Act to deport non-citizens, even to areas that they're not from, such as South Sudan, Libya, El Salvador. And that also ties into the fourth feature as well, which is identifying and suppressing at all costs the ruling elite's identified enemies, right? And so you see these boogeymen that people create or personify to justify weaponizing these forces and justify violence against people speaking out. And you saw this under Marcos with the Red Scare due to close ties with the USA. For example, the passage of the Anti-Subversion Act of 1957, which essentially made membership in the Communist Party illegal, but was repealed in 1992. But you also see Trump attacking and antagonizing people by calling people immigrants violent, or Antifa for people who protest, who want to speak out against these attacks on marginalized communities, as well as anyone from the left. So you really see this creation of these boogeyman to rile up a fascist base, which Chris will speak more to in the next slide.
Cool. Thank you, Tattoo. And the last 2 points go very hand in hand. This belief in a superior nation or race, this breed of nationalism isn't based on establishing national sovereignty, but instead supremacy and tyranny. It's an ideology that's based on oppression instead of liberation. These growingly more dire economic conditions that we currently live under as I've mentioned before, it's created the right environment to radicalize their base into fascism. And instead of like demanding for better material conditions, we focus more on culture war issues. We target those who are less fortunate than us. Instead of looking at the consolidation of power that we exist under, we target immigrants, trans people, people of color. And this is ultimately what they use to galvanize their fascist mass base. You think about how the DDS supporters, they'll cheer on the murder of 30,000 people. You think of how MAGA supporters will cheer on ICE agents kidnapping people, like hardworking immigrants. I think it's up to like 70% of people in detention currently have no criminal records. Instead of demanding for better material conditions, the states created a scapegoat so we can go after those who are more vulnerable. These culture war issues is the violent distraction that the fascists in power use to one maintain their power and two to seize more of it. But yes, now that we have a general understanding of fascism, we can pay more attention to how this affects both the Philippines, the United States, and the rest of the world. And yeah, I'll pass it back to Rachel and Joy.
Yeah, please give it up for Tatu and Chris, who are both members of Malaya Movement San Francisco. Show them some love in the chat or react. And thank you to both of you for giving us that very quick Fascism 101 context so that we can have this framework in mind as we understand fascism better in the current situation in the Philippines and the US. We want to note also the Fascism 101 study. That was just 10 minutes, but we have a YouTube video on the Malaya Movement YouTube that you can watch, and also materials so that you can study this with your own chapter as well. And so next, with that in mind, we are going to move into the overall situation in the Philippines, to the US, and globally. So Adine and I will be facilitating this section. I'll pass it to Adine.
Thank you, Rachel. Hi, everyone. I'm Adine. I'm the vice chair of the Malaya Movement USA, and I'm also a member of the Los Angeles chapter. So let's talk about what's happening in the world right now. Like I said, I'm in Los Angeles, so the unleashing of the fascist offensive is pretty immediately felt here. So we'll start there and then zoom out and try to connect. We'll connect everything that's going on in the world. So across the United States, including Los Angeles, maybe especially Los Angeles, the Trump administration is setting ICE, federal agents, and military on regular people on the ground. As an enforcement of fascist immigration policy. But thinking back to the features of fascism, it's really a move to cater to a fascist mass base. Not only are they suppressing Filipino nationals here or immigrants and other immigrants, they're also suppressing what they seem to think are the left to quell that opposition and threats to the ruling order. And of course, we've alluded to it a few times already. The Filipino people are becoming victim to this fascist offensive. The grassroots movement here, Tanggol Migrante, which Malaya has been supportive of, have been helping with the cases of Max Londoño, Lynn Dixon, Alma Bowman, Ligaya Jensen, Kuya Zenar in San Diego, Denmark, and Denmark, Francisco, and Jovi Esperanza in the Northeast. So contrary to maybe some incorrect impression that Filipinos are not being affected by what's happening here, we are. In addition to this militaristic violence, the attacks on Filipinos and other immigrants are all cited. One of which is particularly in the form of the One Big Beautiful Bill, which is meant to strangle the services, social services that a lot of Filipino migrants depend on. Additionally to that, we can see that this administration is making every move to consolidate its power or consolidate the power into the executive branch. related to that is the reduction of taxes, extreme reduction of taxes on the highest earning bracket here in the U.S. So we can see again, fascism is the use of violence and authoritarian means to secure the power of an elite in the minority. So that's what's happening domestically in the United States. If we could go to the next slide. Now, it's not a coincidence that a fascist offensive is also being unleashed in other parts of the world by the United States. So the US is supporting Israel's occupation and genocide of Palestine. Israel being the US's top ally to ensure US presence in the Middle East, since it is US policy to impose itself in the Middle East to secure access in order to maintain economic and military dominance and military power against Russia and China. So it's named global rivals. And recently the US bombed Iran or several of Iran's nuclear facilities. Not a coincidence, because Iran is the strongest opposition to the US encroachment in the Middle East. And of course, this is affecting our people across the globe in the midst of war, displacement, and of course, calls for repatriation back home. I believe at least one Filipino national has been documented to have died in Iran because of the attacks. And of course, not only is this happening in this part of, or the western part of Asia, it's happening in the eastern part in the Asia Pacific. If we could go to the next slide. As we know, the US is putting more and more military in this West Philippine Sea, more troops, more bases, more missiles actually on US territory to provoke war with China, since it is in the US's strategic interest to push back China's influence and economic growth, because it is a direct threat to US economic influence in the world. And it is also doing this to ensure that in collaboration with the Marcos regime, to ensure that Philippine markets and real estate and natural resources will keep being available to the United States, to the economic order, to US corporations. And of course the US fully knows the fascist offensive that's also being unleashed in the Philippines, and of course is very apathetic to it, so long as it has the partnership of the Marcos regime. So we see the collaboration between the Philippine fascists and the United States fascists, and the supplying of weaponry and political endorsement by the US to the Philippines. So that's briefly US and world situation. I'll pass it back to Rachel to talk more so specifically about the Philippines.
Thanks, Adine. Yes, next slide, please. And speaking of the fascists in the Philippines, we see very clearly feature one, right? The small elite of big capital owning class that is wielding state power. We understand that in the Philippines, there is the persistence of political dynasties that's plaguing the Philippines, where the highest seats of power are always in the hands of wealthy families, such as now the Marcoses and Dutertes, right? So on the right, you see the picture of VP Sara Duterte, who was impeached in February for the misuse of over 600 million Philippine pesos in confidential funds. That's about 10 million US dollars. And her trial is going to be beginning on August 4, so 1 week after Marcos's SONA. We also have Marcos Jr., the president, and a reminder that he is going to be visiting the US tomorrow. Please throw an emoji or a reaction in the chat or react. How does that make you feel that Marcos is going to be in the US? Yes, boo! Angry face, tomato, tomato, tomato. That's right, because Marcos Jr., we understand that he's going to be negotiating regarding the 20% tariff on Philippine goods that has been imposed by Trump. But we should also contextualize this meeting on the heels of the meetings between the Defense Secretary Enrique Manalo with Marco Rubio recently, and $5 billion arms sale to the Philippines as well. And so with Marcos's visit, we know that there is no indication that he is going to be discussing the issues that is really facing Filipinos overseas, namely what has been mentioned about detention and an attack on migrants. And this refusal by the Marcos administration to speak out against Trump. We should really see that's the exchange for the military aid, the security aid, and maintaining this relationship and status quo with the US. Next slide. We also can't forget about Rodrigo Duterte, whose ICC trial is going to be in September, and he's going to be tried for the crimes against humanity that were committed during his administration, amounting to over 30,000 killings and even more atrocities. And we're going to be hearing more about this later in the webinar. Next slide. We also must talk about the fascist tactics of the Philippine government, namely the actual policies that are used by the government in order to really enact unmitigated violence on the people. It's used to instill fear in people from speaking out. These laws that you see on here are policies, the Anti-Terror Law, Terrorism Financing Prevention and Suppression Act, the NTF-LCAC, these so often having baseless accusations that are meant to instill fear and repress people's movements. We're gonna watch a video from Malaya Movement's first immersion trip to really understand how do these policies affect people on the ground.
Ako po ay si Filipe Helye, isang volunteer para sa Human Rights Advocates Negros. Ang EDSRAN po ay isang human rights organization. Kami po ay nagdodokumento ng mga human rights violations, lalo na yung state initiated na violations, state-sponsored na violations. At nagbibigay ng training sa ating mga sektor, ito ng manggagawa, mga magsasaka, para manindigan sa kanilang karapatan. Yung Negros ay ala martial law. Ginigipit ang mayan, may mga red tagging, harassment, iba't ibang forma ng panggigipit ng Estado. Yung kampanyang counter-insurgency at kontra-terorismo. Ako po ay kinasuhan ng Financing Terrorism Prevention and Suppression Act. Isa sa mga development workers na kinasuhan bilang forma ng panggigipit sa aking gawain. Munting na natin, no? Ang Negros ay nakabase yung kanyang ekonomiya, yung socio-political niya sa industriya ng sugar. At matindi yung pakikibaka ng ating mga manggagawang bukid para sa sweldo, para sa kanilang mga rights, sa kanilang mga karapatan, at sa kanilang mga benepisyo. Kung binibigay yan ng gobyerno, yung mga manggagawang bukid natin, no? Pero hindi. Kaya may mga paglaban sila para sa kanilang karapatan. Ang paglaban na ito ay yung respond ng Estado, ng gobyerno, isupilin ang mga paglaban na ito. Sa mga mamamayan ng US at mga naninirahan sa United States, no? Kailangan nating kondinahin itong ginagawa ng rehimeng Marcos Jr. sa karapatan ng sambayanang Pilipino. Kailangang malaman ninyo yung ginagawa ng rehimeng ito sa karapatang pantao. At nananawagan kami, suportahan nyo kami sa aming pakikibaka.
And so in that video, Ka Ipe is explaining how clearly that when the farm workers are standing up for their rights, they are met with repression and met by violence, and how these policies are really being used against the people to suppress their activism. And then we'll play the next video, which is also from the immersion trip.
Aside from that, there are also human rights violations. Example in what happened to Jed and I, we were abducted last year because of our work on defending Manila Bay from reclamation projects.
Ang totoo po dinukot kami ng mga militar sakay ng van. Napilitan din kami na sumurrender dahil pinagbantaan yung buhay namin. Yun po ang totoo. Hindi rin namin ginusto na mapunta kami sa kustodya ng mga militar. Hindi rin totoo yung laman ng affidavit dahil ginawa yun, pinirmahan yun sa loob ng kampo ng militar. Wala lang kaming magagawa sa mga pagkakataon na yun.
Hindi po totoo na kusang loob po kaming sumurrender dahil pinilit lang po kami. Nung gabi po ng September 2, naglalakad lang po kami sa kalsada nung meron pong dumukot sa amin. May tumigil pong SUV sa harap namin, tas dinukot po kami, tas pinilit kaming pasamahin sa kanila.
And from Jonila and Jed's testimony, we see how they are activists that were abducted by state forces and had a forced surrender. You can go to the next slide. That the sheer number of these atrocities that are continuing to happen under the Marcos Jr. administration, that you can see on the infographic the number of extrajudicial killings, the enforced disappearances, indiscriminate firings, everything on here, that we can see that the killings and the atrocities are continued from the Duterte administration. They are continued from the same bloody legacy of Marcos Sr., right? And many of these atrocities are happening in the countryside on peasant communities as well. Next slide. But this fascism and this repression is never taken lying down. And so despite all of this repression, the people are really rising up in mass and getting clear victories. We have on the left Kuya Max, who was recently released from ICE detention in Washington, in the Northwest Detention Facility, where people are really being subjected to terrible conditions. Kuya Max was even sent to solitary confinement. and his release and the release of other Filipinos who Tanggol Migrante has been able to advocate for. Those victories are really won by the grassroots organizing, by the families and communities who are doing the tireless work on the ground. And it shows we can't wait. We can't rely on the government. We can't rely on the consulate to do these things, because it's really us who is going to advocate and expose these things. And also on the right, we have people in the Philippines and all over the world who are pushing for justice and accountability, pushing for Sara Duterte to be impeached, for Rodrigo Duterte and Marcos to be held accountable for their crimes. And so again, we should remember our role to really carry out this fight against fascism. And I will pass it back to Joy. Thank you.
Thank you. Is my volume okay? Can I get like a thumbs? Okay, yay, thank you. Okay, so thank you, Rachel and Nadine, for giving us an overview of the global situation. I personally really appreciate the interviews with the activists in the Philippines and the last slide, or this slide that we're seeing on resistance. It really reminds us that even though we may be far away from the homeland, we are fighting together. And that takes us to the local situations of Malaya, Los Angeles, and Florida. So next slide. And I'll be presenting the situation on LA, extrapolating on what Adine said earlier, and then after me will be Stephanie on Florida. So I think Los Angeles has really been on the national news a lot, but to give a breakdown of the data and the figures of the intense military presence here. So since early June, there's been 4,800 troops, including National Guard and Marines. Really the first time in US history this many troops have been deployed in US soil in this manner. And in June, there were 560 arrests across Los Angeles protests, because you can imagine Los Angeles is very much a city with a high immigrant population. So many people in our communities, including the Filipino community, went out to many rallies and protests because we saw the illegal sweeps by ICE and the kidnappings in June, over 700 plus, and they kind of stopped. Law enforcement really stopped gathering data, honestly, after June. But when we were doing chapter reflections as well as community discussions on the military presence here in LA, a lot of our members and community members really saw the parallels with the militarization under Duterte during COVID, with the curfews, the checkpoints, and when violators of these curfews were caged. And so the reality here is very visceral for us, and very much reminded us of the situation back home. And before we go to the next slide, I will say there's a video that highlights local protests of ICE occupations of a hospital in the past couple weeks. So next slide.
And at the federal building in downtown LA, at a press conference following about 100 plus ICE agents and what seems to be military staging at MacArthur Park, which is a Salvadoran refugee haven.
Government is willing to push their agenda of attacking the immigrant and migrant community, and that is an inhumane thing to do to our community here in LA, and that is a clear sign of fascism. Earlier today too, we were at Glendale Memorial Hospital, where ICE occupied a lobby of the hospital there, and we as the community were able to work with the labor unions there, with the nurses, and get the workers together to help protect the patients there and the patient that was specifically being targeted.
Los Angeles, across the entire U.S., and also at home in the Philippines, this wave of fascism here is linked to the wave of fascism there, and thus our struggles are linked, and when we show up here, we're showing up against U.S. imperialism everywhere. When you're seeing this so close to home, it's more important than ever to become connected with an organization that fights this, like Malaya, that shows up at places like this and in the community. And so we call you to join us.
So that was a video from one of the local protests a couple weeks ago, and you got to hear from some of my fellow members in my chapter. So to build off of that, we've been part of our Tango Migrante network here in LA and other community self-defense networks. The LA chapter has really been attending protests at that local hospital, Glendale Memorial, which is complicit with ICE and letting them occupy the lobby as they awaited to detain a patient. ICE and the corporate hospital did violate this person's human right to medical care. And at a press conference, nurse union reps reported multiple HIPAA violations. And even yesterday morning, ICE forcibly took this patient away and transferred them forcibly to another hospital. And the hospital staff at Glendale Memorial tried to stop them. So our chapter has really been on the ground making contact with the nurses, the unions, and the press, because this case really sets a dangerous precedent. We want to build coalition to keep our community safe and also build people power to hold fascists accountable. And our chapter has really grown a lot in the past 2 months. And personally, I'm inspired to see the new and experienced members contributing their ideas, their skills, and talents to these local struggles and really connecting them back to the fight against Duterte, Marcos, and foreign intervention in the Philippines. So I will end there, and then I'll pass it off to Stephanie.
Thanks, Joy. Hey, everyone. I'm Stephanie. I'm with the Florida chapter of Malaya Movement. And yeah, definitely hearing a lot of parallels coast to coast. So at the start of the month on July 1st, Donald Trump made yet another visit to South Florida to open the migrant detention center that's actually come to be named Alligator Alcatraz, along with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. The facility located in the Everglades was built by private companies to house 5,000 detainees. DeSantis invoked an immigration state of emergency to seize the county-owned land and quicken construction. Talbert Cypress, chairman of the Miccosukee Business Council, said that the facility is surrounded by Big Cypress National Preserve, which lands have been home to the Miccosukee for centuries. Some tribal villages, including Seminole members and ceremonial grounds, are less than 1 mile from Alligator Alcatraz's entrance. Cypress told ABC News there's been no environmental impact study. The study done in 1974 suggested that putting any kind of airship in the area was going to have significant impact on the Everglades. We're concerned about safety, Custom and Borders Patrol, all the traffic going and coming through here and the flights coming in and out. So we see this as bypassing of democratic process, and the Miccosukee are filing suit against the state for oppressing their right to protect their ancestral lands. On his visit, Donald Trump claimed that the Everglades concentration camp would hold, quote, some of the most menacing migrants, some of the most vicious people on the planet. However, to comply with this administration's quotas, they said they want to arrest up to 3,000 people a day. And just to even try to comply with that, over 70% of ICE's arrests last month were of people with no criminal charges or convictions. So given that we're seeing Native Americans being caught up and harassed in these ICE raids, like citizens across the country, we're seeing this treatment of certain people, likely based on their physical appearance, and enforcing this belief in a superior race, that some people don't belong here, some people can be treated certain ways, and rights for the so-called enemies can be suppressed, to tie it back to these aspects and discussion of fascism. And then to continue on this different kinds of treatment, as for the conditions of the camp, although DeSantis has said there is air conditioning, summer here typically exceeds 90 degrees. This is when we receive most of our annual rainfall. On July 2nd, just one day after the opening, videos circulated showing the camp flooding before detainees even arrived. In less than a week, there were reports of a lack of bathing water, meals being served once a day and infested with maggots, and the lights never being shut off. One man said that many detained have residency documents, and another from Colombia spoke of not being able to access his medicine for 3 days, as well as his Bible being confiscated. Later, a 28-year-old green card holder and mother of a 2-year-old said that the toilets have overflown. And, this is all in just it hasn't even been open a month. And all these reports of inhumane treatment have been made. A 15-year-old has also ended up in the facility. And these are, unfortunately not without precedent, especially under DeSantis. Last year, a 60-year-old died in ICE custody. This year, 5 people have already died, mostly in Chrome Detention Center in Miami, which has had a long history of abuse, including overcrowding, illness, and sexual abuse. While we have not received news of Filipino detention in Florida, as a hub of tourism, we know there are many migrants in the hospitality sector, on cruise ships and hotels, and with members of the community detained with all citizenship statuses, including folks we've mentioned earlier, like Lagaya Jensen, Alma Bowman, Kuya Max, and even U.S. citizens being deported. It would be a mistake to put faith into fascist governments, whether in the Philippines or the U.S., that prioritize profit over people. We can go to the next slide, please. The Everglades concentration camp was built in 8 days and will cost taxpayers $450 million each year. But it's supposed to be like reimbursed by FEMA. Also on screen are just 2 of the businesses awarded contracts to furnish and provide other resources to the facility. This is a slap in the face to Floridians. We're at the start of hurricane season, with many people still grappling with damage from last year's storms. During these hurricanes, Floridians are left to fend for themselves. Last year, squabbling for gas before and after storms Milton and Helene, and we can be without power for weeks. And while there should be a focus on those in detention with their rights being denied, we ask that the community remember that's where their money is going, instead of, where out of all the things it could be going towards, it's the denial of rights towards people like us. Filipinos here have had their cars, homes, and businesses flooded. And with many insurance companies fleeing the state and the rising cost of living, Filipinos are relocating, and our cultural centers are facing funding challenges, scattering and isolating our communities. We call on Florida Filipinos to remember this insult to us, our Latino, Indigenous, and Black families, as there are Black migrants and Black migrants being detained. And even the idea of weaponizing alligators goes back to the U.S. chattel slavery and Jim Crow era, and using Black babies to lure out alligators as bait. And so we call to join in Malaya, Florida solidarity. Jacksonville is home to the largest population of Filipinos in the state, and possibly the whole of the Southeast U.S. Camp Blanding, about 30 miles south of Jacksonville, has been identified as another possible detention center. We actually had our members up there to speak out against it earlier today. And yeah, we're just building those connections and relationships with our students, faith centers, and migrants, as well as networks, keeping eyes out and other support for families, because now is the time for us to find the most vulnerable in our communities and the resources to protect them and really build it up that people power like LA was talking about. Thank y'all.
Thank you so much, Stephanie and Joy, and the Florida and LA chapters for really exposing the conditions and also like really illustrating the connections, right, between the repression that we're seeing and the disappearing of migrants. What is this money actually? What is our tax dollars actually going towards? It's going towards these concentration camps. It's going towards the militarization of our communities. And so we really do have an important role to fight back. I also wanted to give a shout out and call out my friend Brandon Lee and also other folks who are calling in from the Justice for Brandon Lee campaign. Just also wanted to highlight Brandon's struggle for justice as well. Brandon, has first experience with the situation of fascism in the Philippines since he suffered an assassination attempt on his life nearly 6 years ago in the Cordillera region in the Philippines. And the anniversary of the assassination attempt is actually coming up in just a few weeks in August. 6 years that justice has not been served, and there has been no accountability for the attack on his life, which was perpetrated by the armed forces of the Philippines. So want to call justice for Brandon Lee, and please follow and check out the campaign information also on further developments from the campaign. I know that Brandon is also, the campaign is also soliciting letters to the Commission on Human Rights in the Philippines to reopen and reinvestigate the case. Yes. So thank you for being here, Brandon. Next slide. So another way of really supporting Malaya Movement USA, as we are a grassroots organization that relies on the tireless efforts and time of volunteers who are doing work on the ground. We do have different fundraising efforts that it would be really awesome if you, yes, you on this call can support. So we have a shop which has Malaya merch so that you can always rep Malaya wherever you go, when you're on the streets, when you're at work. And we also have a very special t-shirt drop that's coming up. So you can pre-order your Palayain t-shirt with 10% of proceeds that are also going to go to our partner in the Philippines, Kapatid, and supporting the needs of political prisoners in the Philippines. Next slide. Because there are other ways to support Malaya Movement USA as well. So you can take out your phone and also scan this QR code to make a direct donation to our national fund. This really can sustain Malaya Movement's work and support our efforts on the ground. You can also support by buying the Balang Araw EP, which is on our Bandcamp. And this was recorded and produced by our very own Malaya members. So definitely check this out. Share it to friends to support Malaya Movement. Next slide. And then there is another way to support Malaya Movement USA. We will have in September a Twitch fundraiser, and we are actually recruiting streamers and participants for the Twitch stream. So you got to get in on this. Calling all gamers, streamers, however you would like to contribute to the Malaya Movement USA fundraiser. Please apply on the QR code and URL here to support Malaya Movement. Yes. Okay, I see some interest. Okay, thank you for supporting our grassroots efforts. Okay, next slide. So as we move ahead in our program today, I am very honored to introduce our next speaker, who is going to be talking about the Duterte trials, the impeachment for corruption and crimes against humanity in the ICC. I'm going to be calling up former Bayan Muna Congressman Rep. Ferdi Gaite to talk about the ICC trial and also the impeachment of Sara Duterte. So I will pass it over to you. Thank you, Paul, for joining us today.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for all those who've this evening, I think, is on our Zoom for under the program of Malaya. It's kind of stormy now here in the Philippines. Bagyong Krising just passed over the northern portion of Manila, of the Philippines, and still kind of rainy. Thank you for having me again, and I will be discussing the Duterte trials, impeachment for corruption and crimes against humanity in the International Criminal Court. Fortunately, my colleague in Bayan Muna, Atty. Nery Colmenares, prepared a few slides to discuss the upcoming trials, the impeachment at the International Criminal Court at The Hague, and other is the issue of Rodrigo Duterte, the father, who is now convicted, is now being tried for the crimes against humanity at the Netherlands, at The Hague. So Atty. Nery Colmenares prepared this presentation. So first slide first. First, the two Dutertes, Sara and Rodrigo, and are now being tried in various, will be tried in various courts. One locally at the Senate through the impeachment court, and the father, Rodrigo Duterte, at The Hague, at the International Criminal Court. So we'll first discuss the case of Sara Duterte, currently the vice president. So last February of this year, Sara Duterte was impeached by the lower house on the basis of the betrayal of public trust for failing to account public funds entrusted to her custody, among others. So particularly on the case of Sara Duterte, she betrayed the public trust by using what we call the confidential funds, by her failure and refusal to account public funds entrusted to her as her confidential fund, amounting to 612.5 million from December 2022 to 2023, including 125 million pesos, which she spent in just 11 days. So this is what we filed for various groups, essentially, well, three, actually, various groups filed various articles of impeachment with the lower house, which is tasked to hear the case. And the National Democratic Forces filed the case against the betrayal of public trust. Eventually, in February of this year, the lower house approved the articles of impeachment and was immediately sent to the Senate, which is now tasked to try to hear and try. And essentially, the objective is to remove or convict the sitting vice president. So, other than the betrayal of public trust, she's also been cases of graft and corruption, bribery, and other high crimes, including the threat to assassinate the sitting president, the Senate Speaker, the Speaker of the House, even the wife of Bongbong Marcos, Lisa Masa, was threatened by Sara in her midnight rant against this administration. So there are many cases filed against her, and the current status I will be explaining. Next slide, please. So just to background the process, so there's the impeachment case against Vice President Sara Duterte. However, there's been a delay. I mentioned earlier that the National Democratic Forces filed the impeachment as early as December of last year, but it was only acted upon by the lower house on February of this year. But despite the procedure, constitutional provision, that the case, the verified complaint or resolution of impeachment is filed by at least a third of all the members of the House, which was done last February, the same shall constitute the articles of impeachment and trial by the Senate shall forthwith proceed. And this is the contentious issue, wherein the Senate President, Jesus Gadero, debated what forthwith means. She claims that forthwith does not mean immediate, and he was castigated for his position because forthwith obviously means immediately. So this is contained in Article 11, Section 5 of our Constitution. And currently, there is already a position to plan to dismiss already the impeachment articles of impeachment that was filed with the Senate. Article 11, Section 7, states that the Senate shall have the sole power to try and decide all cases of impeachment. But despite the fact that they haven't even commenced the trial, there is also a move to have it already dismissed. So this will be an issue again with the court. So right now, one of the ways that they tried to delay the process also was they remanded or sent back the articles of impeachment to the lower house. This was done by the Senate before the session ended last June, because they claimed that because of the change in the current Senate and lower house composition, there was an election last May, and they tried to raise the issue whether the current incoming Congress or Senate were still amenable to pursue the trial, and also if they were still also if they complied with the requirement by the through the constitutional provision regarding the process of impeachment. So next slide. So accordingly, impeachment court is different and not bound by the legislative calendar. So the issue whether the incoming Senate is still does it still have the power to hear and try and decide on the impeachment? Well, according to our legal luminaries like Nery Colmenares, they believe that the impeachment court may convene even if the Senate is in recess, or even if there's a change in the Senate composition. In Rule 10, there was this was just the decision at 2 p.m. or such other hour as the Senate may order of the day appointed for the trial of an impeachment, the legislative business of the Senate, if there be any, shall be suspended. So this is only for the legislative business, but not for the impeachment court, which is not a legislative function. So also in Rule 3 of the impeachment court, unless the Senate provides otherwise, it shall continue in session from day to day until final judgment shall be rendered, and so much longer as may in its judgment be necessary. So some of those who are trying to have the impeachment dismissed were using the legislative role or function of the Senate. And it was clarified that the legislative is different from the impeachment court. And these are two entirely different matters. And therefore, the Senate President, Speaker Chis Escudero, was wrong in saying that it must follow the same rules of legislation. So there was this caused a major delay in the impeachment proceedings. Next slide. So right now, we're still awaiting the schedule for the impeachment. Originally was set for after the resumption of the session come July 28, which is also the State of the Nation address. So right now, there is an existing debate on how they will proceed, because obviously the term forthwith has already been violated. It was never done immediately after it was submitted on February of this year. So the issue now is how they will proceed. They've already, the previous Senate has already taken its oath to become the court, the impeachment court, but there is a change in the composition of the Senate because there was a new election. Not all, there were 12 who were replaced, although some were re-elected, but there's some changes in the composition of the Senate. Now, on the crimes against humanity filed against President Rodrigo Duterte, which is now being heard by the International Criminal Court at The Hague, some background. First, he was accused of having conducted widespread and systematic attacks against civilians in the form of murder of thousands of civilians prescribed under Article 7, Paragraph A of the Rome Statute, resulting in the death of at least 4,410 persons in police operations as of July 31, 2018, up to 23,000 since he assumed office on June 30, 2016. And this is essentially a crimes against humanity. And B, other inhumane acts, the widespread and systematic attacks against civilians in the form of inhuman acts intentionally causing great suffering or serious injury to body or mental health, physical health prescribed under Article 7, Paragraph K. So this was the case that was filed against us, former President Duterte. So these are the accusations leveled against Duterte and are being heard currently. So next slide. Next slide. Well, like father, like daughter. They also been trying to delay the process in the ICC. The lawyers of Rodrigo Duterte have been very active in trying to delay the procedure in the ICC. And right now, there have been various attempts. First, to apply for an interim release, meaning Duterte will be released. Although this is a procedure applicable under the ICC rules are under Article 60, the initial proceedings before the court, which states that the person subject to a warrant of arrest may apply for interim release pending trial if the pre-trial chamber is satisfied that the conditions set forth in Article 58, Paragraph 1 are met, the person shall continue to be detained. If it is not satisfied, the pre-trial chamber shall release the person with or without conditions. So this has been the tactic of the defense under Duterte, of Rodrigo Duterte. Next slide. So last two slides. Article 58 in the issuance by the pretrial chamber of a warrant of arrest. So this has been one of the contentious issues, whether the warrant of arrest stands. Article 58 of the Rome Statute states that the pretrial chamber shall issue a warrant of arrest of a person if it is satisfied that the arrest of the person appears necessary. One, to ensure the person's appearance at trial. Two, to ensure that the person does not obstruct or endanger the investigation or court proceedings, or three, to prevent the person from continuing with the commission of that crime or related crime, which is why those who are pushing for the conviction of Duterte are opposing his release, even at the interim, because he may do all the matters stated. First, he may not be able to appear at the trial. He may still obstruct or danger the investigation, since, by the way, if you still don't know, Duterte was re-elected as mayor of Davao City. And the whole clan is effectively, the vice mayor is the son of Duterte and is now functioning as the officer in charge in Davao. So they still are in power. Okay. And finally, impeachment and the ICC. So there will be concerns building up to this next few months. And the State of the Nation address here in the Philippines will start on July 28th, where Bongbong, after probably going there in the US tomorrow to grovel probably with Donald Trump on the issue of the increased tariffs imposed on Philippine products, will be again stating and probably with Rose will be at the State of the Nation address here in Congress to supposedly highlight the wonderful conditions in our country, which is actually not true. As we have already, as many of our speakers have said, we will see how the lies will again be shown that our economy is still thriving if our political situation is the democratic processes in our country continue. We will hear the lies again during the SONA, and we will call it sonangaling because they will again portray the lies. So last slide.
And just to let you know po, you have about 1 more minute then.
Okay. So
thank you po.
Last slide. So the violation and of laws and grafting corruption and human rights during the time of the dictatorial reign of Duterte will be the highlight of the of this impeachment. They are trying to avoid accountability and justice, claiming violations of the rights and asking for humanitarian consideration, despite the fact when they were in power, Rodrigo Duterte has been violating the human rights. And number three, the Dutertes are still influential in our courts and in legislature. And the answer to that come July 28th and succeeding dates and months will be like our compatriots in the US. We will continue with our people's protest. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative Ferdi, for the presentation. Let's get some applause in the chat or some thank yous. But yeah, thank you for explaining the impeachment process of Sarah and the Crimes Against Humanity ICC case against Rodrigo. You know, like father, like daughter, as Rep. Ferdi said, and this is all happening under Bongbong Marcos. He and his wife, Liza Marcos, are just like his father and mother, Ferdinand Sr. and Imelda. So now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Attorney Maria Sol Taule, the Deputy Secretary General of Karapatan. She is a litigation lawyer who handles cases of political prisoners and other victims of human rights violations in the Philippines. So pass it to you, attorney.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Good morning from Quezon City. I'll be sharing my presentation. I hope my audio is clear and I hope you can see now my screen. Is it all right?
Yes.
All right. So this is the current human rights situation in the Philippines. Oh, wait a minute. I think I just jumped. Okay. So we all know that in 2022, the two most powerful political families, namely the Dutertes and the Marcoses, merged power to run for the national elections. And of course, they won that election, but that alliance was short-lived, and eventually there was a complete breakaway of the alliance of the Marcos and Dutertes, and it culminated actually this year when Rodrigo Duterte was already arrested by the International Criminal Court and was eventually brought to The Hague in the Netherlands. So, but even then, the Marcos regime was relentless in perpetrating violations of human rights and international humanitarian law, or the IHL, especially in the countryside in the Philippines, even as it moved to further consolidate its power against the Dutertes, its biggest ruling class rivals. So this is, I saw the earlier presentation, there was the similar uh, publication material, but this one is the latest. This one is from July 2022 when Marcos Jr. was elected to office until June 2025. So you can see here that there's around 129 cases of extrajudicial killings. This does not include cases of extrajudicial killings in relation to drug war, because there's still drug war in the Philippines and there's still killings under the drug war. It was, I think, according to the Has, an organization which documents these cases, there's around 1,000 killings under the drug war. So, but noteworthy in these violations is the number of cases of enforced disappearances, which is 15 for the last 3 years. This is quite alarming because under the Duterte administration, we documented 20 cases of enforced disappearances in the entire 6 years. But now we're just halfway through the 6-year term of Bongbong Marcos, and we already documented 15 cases of enforced disappearances. And these people are still missing up to this day. The numbers does not include those individuals who were abducted and who were later on surfaced dead or alive. That includes the cases of Jed and Janila, which you earlier watched. So it's really quite alarming. And you can also see here thousands of and millions of community violations, as we call it, um, under the National Security Policy, or NSP, of 2023 to 2028, or the whole of the nation approach, which is literally a copy paste from the counterinsurgency policy framework of the US government and previous administrations. So Here, citizens who advance their interests, rights, and oppose the government's anti-people policies are considered, well, enemies of the state. Here you can see a map in your screen. This is the cases of bombings in the countryside, perpetrated, of course, by none other than the armed forces of the Philippines. So it includes imposing curfews, food and economic blockades, and restricting people's movements. These operations were often accompanied by aerial bombings and artillery attacks, and polluting the peasants' production fields and derailing their livelihood. And for the record, just this year there was a restoration of the military aid by the U.S. government to the Philippines amounting to 500 million US dollars. And of course, it's being used to terrorize the Filipino people, especially in the countryside, with the amount of bombing of communities that you see here on your screen. That happened during the visit of the U.S. State Secretary of here in the Philippines. And of course, there's also joint U.S. military exercises under the pretense of countering Chinese aggression in the disputed waters. But instead of easing tensions, this is exacerbating them, actually. These provocations threaten to overshadow legitimate claims and could undermine efforts to resolve maritime disputes between the Philippines and China peacefully. So, of course, Marcos Jr. still maintains the NTF-LCAC, the primary interagency government institution that is responsible for the forced surrenders, for red tagging activists and human rights defenders. We've been calling for the abolition of NTF-LCAC for the longest time, and no less than the special rapporteur of the freedom of opinion and expression, Irene Can, also called for the abolition of the NTF-LCAC recently in her final report before the UN Human Rights Council. So the same modus was employed by the military in many urban areas, including Metro Manila, where soldiers trained in Saiwar-occupied impoverished communities badgered local leaders into clearing their names. They're being called to the villages, barangays, and forming parallel groups in an attempt to supplant local progressive organizations. Of course, we've been calling for the longest time also for the abolition of the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020. It has been 5 years since its enactment in 2020 in the middle of the pandemic, and there's been around 227 individuals who were charged with cases of the violation of the anti-terror law and the Terrorist Financing Prevention and Suppression Act of 2012. And the most impacted are the communities, the development organizations, the civil society organization, and individuals. And so we are currently holding activities and protests to call for the abolition of the anti-terror law, or the repeal of the anti-terror law. So meanwhile, in areas of the countryside considered as hotbeds of insurgency, unarmed peasants were extrajudicially killed and made out to have been slain in so-called encounters. These are staged encounters, while others were involuntarily disappeared, tortured, or illegally arrested and jailed. So NPA members captured alive and rendered hors de combat were nonetheless killed in blatant violations of the IHL. So this I mentioned already. So we go now to the political prisoners. Currently, we have 737 political prisoners in the country. I'm sorry, I skipped that. Right. So held in various prisons and jails nationwide, 164 of the 737 were arrested under the current administration, and 96 of them are sick, and 104 are elderly prisoners. One was recently released, named elderly technician Prudencio Cebu Calube Jr., who was alleged to be the missing NDFP consultant abducted in 2006, or almost 20 years now. Calubid has a bounty of 7.8 million pesos. Despite the wrongful arrest, the state maintained that this Prudencio Calubid, the 81-year-old elderly prisoner, is the same Prudencio Kalubi that was abducted in 2006. He's now released, but the Philippine government is going after Kalubi and filed a motion for reconsideration for his release. Okay. Okay, I already mentioned this. So, yes, the red tagging continues, and the attacks against progressives also continue. Red tag individuals became vulnerable to more serious human rights violations, such as the extrajudicial killings and forced disappearances and illegal arrest and imprisonment. So, of course, I think we've made the invitation already wherever you are in the world. Please do join activities in preparation for the State of the Nation address of Bongbong Marcos Jr. And I thank all our colleagues and comrades in the US. And I hope and I wish you good luck to your activities during the visit of Bongbong Marcos there tomorrow. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a good day.
Okay, so we have just a few minutes for our question and answer session. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat, especially for our guest speakers from the Philippines, but the questions are open to all of our presenters today. And to introduce myself while we think of some questions, my name is Julie. I'm the National Secretary General of Malaya Movement USA, and very excited tomorrow to welcome Bongbong Marcos here in the United States in Washington, D.C. So everything that we learned today about the increasing fascism, we will make sure that the people's demands are heard as we give Marcos a warm welcome. But yeah, if there's any questions, please put them in the chat. We probably have time for just 1 to 2. Okay, to get us started, one question for Representative Ferdi Gaite. Malaya was founded in 2018 in direct response to the rising fascism and drug war killings under Duterte. With Sarah's impeachment trial, the ICC trial, we've seen a resurgence of the anti-fascist movement here in the US and globally. Could you share what the sentiment is of Filipinos on the ground? And also, Marcos has been visibly quiet on the issue. He's not pushing for it. What do the Marcoses have to benefit for not pushing forward the impeachment trial?
Well, the impeachment trial, right now, there is a resurgence to hold Sara Duterte accountable for the misuse of government resources, and including her role, actually, even in the extrajudicial killings during the drug war. So there is a increasing number, based on surveys, of people who want to hold her accountable. However, there is also a block within, because of the divisions, the polarization of our political, in the political arena. If probably an indication, you will see that there are pro Duterte senators who were elected last 20 last May 2025. One of the key persons is Bongo, one of the more reliable ally of Duterte. So we will see. There will be the movement to hold Sara Duterte accountable on the issue of her misuse of government funds, her betrayal of public trust, will be more pronounced in the coming months, because this is the purpose of the impeachment process, wherein the allegations leveled against her will be shown in public, and that is what we really want. So people will have a better idea of how the government resources are being used. So right now, I still sincerely believe that Once all this information is out, the people realize how we're being practically screwed by those in power, by their impunity in the use of resources, which we believe could have been used better for the improvement of social services, increase in salaries of government workers, which I also represent, and other concerns of the people.
Great. And on the point of what does Marcos have to gain by not pushing for the impeachment?
Well, they belong to the same class, the bureaucrat capitalists, and they are afraid that once there is a strong mass movement that is actually responsible for pushing the impeachment and the even the trial of Rodrigo Duterte, the ICC. This was brought about by the people's movement, the protest actions, the demand for accountability, and being part of the ruling class. He fears that same power may be turned against him. So, which is why, as we've seen historically in our country, once the previous president is, there were cases like Era Estrada, Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. They were arrested by the previous administration, but eventually they will be pardoned, as what happened before. So the ruling class will still continue to hold on to power, but also protecting their own, because they do not want that the people, the real people who must have the power to gain in this debacle of the ruling class. So Marcos will try to prevent or try to assuage the ruling class that I'm still part of you, don't worry, and we'll still screw the people while we hold on to economic and political power.
Thank you so much, Representative Ferdi. I'm so sorry, but that is all the time we have. If people have more questions, we'll be sure to get them answered in our follow-up email, or we'll reach out to you directly. But thank you once again to all of our speakers, Attorney Taule, Representative Ferdi, and I will next pass it off to Tabitha to start us on our closing.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much. My name is Tams. I'm the national chairperson of Malaya Movement USA, based in Portland, Oregon. So shout out to the Portland Watch Party. Hi to y'all. I have FOMO, but I'm actually here in Washington, D.C. right now to be part of the welcoming party for Marcos Jr. So I'm also very excited to be part of that with our chapters here in Washington, D.C. and other organizations. But yeah, just wanted to kind of close off our state of the nation under fascism in the Philippines and in the United States for the Filipino people. What are we facing? I hope that our presentation today gave everyone here a better understanding of fascism, how it manifests in our communities, and how starting to see the inklings of what resistance it looks like. One of the things that we wanted to answer today was, what does the state of resistance look like against fascism? We heard it from our chapter in Los Angeles. We are seeing it to what people are doing in the Philippines, but we're seeing more people take to the streets, massing up against ICE raids, joining our organizations, and the people are pushing for the trials against the Dutertes. We are paying attention and we are remaining vigilant and we are ready to take action. We're also seeing the state of resistance look like building new kinds of organizations, the forming of stronger organizations and alliances like the Tanggol Migrante Network that folks have been sharing about in the fight for Filipinos in detention, of which I know many of our chapters on the ground have been supporting with. The video earlier of Kaipe, I was actually the one interviewing him for that. I was part of Malaya USA's first immersion trip to the Philippines, and I was part of the group that was able to go to Negros. And it had been one of the first times in many, many years that Kaipe was able to go into the hacienda or the community of haciendas that we were able to go to in Silay and Negros, given the intense fascist repression that Negros itself has been facing since Duterte took office. What I saw in Kaipe was this genuine desire to help sugar farmers who were being slighted at every corner by their landlords, their employers, their exploiters. And for this, he was targeted by the state. He was teaching people their rights. He was teaching people how to read the agreements that they were signing. And he became a target for the fascist state in the Philippines. Like he said in the video, Negros is really the site of intense fascist repression. Kaipet knew Zara Alvarez. He worked very closely with Zara Alvarez, who we know was martyred a few years ago. He knew Randy Echanes, who was also martyred a few years ago. And so many human rights defenders have been martyred in Negros. And yet Kaipet and those that we met in Negros continue to fight. We got to hear from jeepney drivers, from other sugar workers, from urban poor communities about how in the midst of fascist repression, they are trying to continue to build that resistance. Because we know that fascism needs the people to be afraid, but we can't be afraid. Like Kaipe, sugar workers, we can't be afraid. Malaya was built on this legacy of activists who dared to say, "Maki baka wag matakot." In the
My headphones just died. Hold on. Can folks hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Yes. We shout, we chant, "Makibaka wag matakot." It's part of Malaya's ethos. It's in our genes. And Filipino legacy is one of struggle against our oppressors, right? We fought against Spanish colonialism. We fought against the US coming into the country, against Japanese aggression. And I guess just as a reminder for all of us, as we understand the state of the nation under fascist regimes, that as every day that fascism bears its teeth, let's remember all those who laid the groundwork for us to fight. Let's remember this legacy of daring to struggle. Let's remember our legacy of fighting against fascism. Let's remember our legacy of ousting dictators and continuing on that fight. So, tuloy ang laban. Thank you so much for joining us in our call today. I'll pass it back to our MCs.
Thank you, Tabs. Next slide. Me and Rachel are just gonna close it off with calls to action. So next slide, please. So, like activists in the Philippines, here we are gathering Filipinos overseas in a Duterte Panagutin network, or Duterte Accountability Network. So it's part of our revamped new anti-fascist campaign. We heard about the ICC trial details as well as the impeachment trial details. So Filipinos all over the world are paying attention to these, and non-Filipinos too. So it's really our duty as Malaya to really bring together Filipinos here in the diaspora who want to seek justice for the victims of the Duterte clan. Rachel?
Yes, exactly. And so let's, you take what we learned today, and for those of us in Malaya, take this back to your chapters and also into the community and educate others on fascism in the US and the Philippines and our role in fighting back. And wage our Labanan ang Fascismo campaign.
Okay, next slide. It's our last one. But as we've been saying, like Marcos will be coming here July 20 to July 22 to DC. Chapters, wherever you are, please post your anti-Marcos memes, carousel statements this weekend. Let's really put out our propaganda against this visit. And also next weekend, end of July, join your local PSONA activities. Wherever you are, it's like the biggest Filipino gathering to put forth our political demands and really show an alternative to what the Philippine government is saying. And if you aren't a member already, please join Malaya Movement. There's many chapters across the United States. And then, as the treasurer, donate to our organization. We are completely grassroots volunteer led, and we're doing this because, in our hearts, we really want to serve the people. So that's my last plug. But I'll see you guys at your local PSONA on the Twitch fundraising stream. Makibaka, wag matakot. Thank you so much.
Thank you.